Good morning, everyone. We're glad that you could join us today for the required annual standards update training for educator prep programs, also known as Senate Bill 1 training. We appreciate the opportunity to update you on the Kentucky Academic Standards and our work around supporting vibrant learning experiences for students. My name is Crystal Rowland, and I serve as the Director of the Division of Program Standards. Today's session will be recorded for those who are unable to join us live. You received an email with a copy of the participant handout. Now might be a great time to open that in front of you, or if you printed a copy to capture your handwritten notes, you might want to get that now. After today's session, you'll receive a copy of the PowerPoint with links to the resources that we'll be dropping in the chat during the session. In today's session, you'll hear from several team members from the Office of Teaching and Learning. I will get us started today with an update on the review timeline for the Kentucky Academic Standards, as well as an update for revised standards. Lee Turner and Tina Withorn, reading and writing consultants in the Division of Program Standards, will be providing a deep dive into our newly revised CAS for reading and writing. Fox DeMoisey and Misty Higgins are professional learning coordinators, and they will be sharing information regarding intellectual preparation with the revised standards. And Christy Biggerstaff, Director of the Division of Early Literacy, will share some exciting updates regarding the work around Read to Succeed legislation. We'll have a numeracy update, and we'll close our time with resources for implementing the CAS. KRS 158.6453 established the process and cadence for the development and review of Kentucky academic standards. Each content area is set for review every 6 years on a rotating basis, and the full schedule for review of standards is updated annually and is available on the KDE website. The process required in law is captured in this graphic. It includes 2 rounds of public comment. The standards are reviewed and revised by 4 committees that are composed of primarily classroom teachers with representatives from higher education and business and community. The process is comprehensive and lengthy, taking about 18 months to 2 years to complete. Revised standards and assessments are to be implemented in all schools no later than the 2nd academic year following the process. On October 14th, 2025, the Kentucky Academic Standards for Career Studies and Financial Literacy and the CAS for Health Education and CAS for Physical Education were officially adopted into law. All CAS documents are available on the kystandards.org webpage. With the 6-year schedule for review required in law, these 3 critical academic areas were set to begin review in 2025. The CAS for Reading and Writing began review in January of this year. Social Studies review began in April, and Mathematics begins this month. The CAS for Reading and Writing were approved by the Kentucky Board of Education October 2nd. The timeline for that review process is on the screen here. They are tentatively scheduled to be effective in law May 5th, 2026, and should begin implementation in classrooms in the 26-27 school year. We're going to explore the revisions and take a deep dive into the research and evidence-based practices that are foundational in their design and explore guidance that will support implementation in Kentucky schools. The CAS for Reading and Writing at-a-glance document highlights key shifts in the revised standards. We'll drop that in the chat now and revisit it during our deep dive today. I'll now hand it off to Misty as we shift into looking more deeply at the reading and writing standards in practice.
Good morning, everyone. And so for this next section, we're going to focus on providing high quality standards aligned Tier 1 instruction. And what we're going to be doing is kind of moving in and out of looking at revisions to the reading and writing standards and how HQIR supports implementation of those standards, and kind of then panning out to look at the resources we have to support teachers in providing that strong standards aligned instruction to all content areas within HQIR. So we have a driving question that we would like for you all to keep in mind as we go through today. How might the considerations of the revised Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing and Intellectual Preparation maybe influence your current syllabi and instruction with your undergraduate and or graduate students? And we'll revisit this question toward the end of our time together today. So if you've been with us in previous Senate Bill 1 update trainings, you've likely seen this slide before, which is highlighting the key elements that are needed to strengthen Tier 1 instruction at the local level, and it focuses on moving from vision to impact. And as you can see, that first key element is all about having a common instructional vision in place for a content area. And then it moves to that ultimate impact that we would want to see from that vision, which is the improved student experience and outcomes. We often talk about how those gray boxes in the middle really represent the bridge work that help us to get there. So starting with making sure that we have true access to a strong local curriculum that's anchored in an HQIR, and supporting educators in with that high quality professional learning so that they can provide that high quality standards aligned instruction to all students. So for that first key element around the instructional vision, in our guidance to districts, we recommend that they spend time analyzing 3 lenses with their curriculum team that can inform the drafting of that local vision. And as you can see, the first one is focused on understanding the standards along with their foundational beliefs and the intended impacts on classroom instruction. So I'm going to hand it off to Tina, who's just going to highlight some of the revisions to the reading and writing standards that are important to developing understanding of this particular lens.
Good morning. So to frame our conversation today using the CAS for reading and writing, we want to draw your attention to the design of the standards and the unique features of reading and writing standards that provide clarity for literacy instruction. You may notice from this image that there are no architectural changes or design changes from the 2019 to the 2025 revised version. Each standard continues to be viewed with that guiding principle or broad literacy goal at the top towards as expectations for Kentucky students by graduation, indicated with a graduation cap icon. And then the main standard below that is centered in a progression of the standard, the grade level below to the left and the grade level next to the right. And that progression really supports educators in understanding where their students have been and where they're going. Also unique to reading and writing standards is multidimensionality, and each dimension is color-coded within the standard to show the layer of learning or understanding students are expected. So the red capitalized letters or words represent just the content or literacy concepts within the standard. The green italicized words represent the comprehension layer of learning, and then the purple bold words represent the analysis layer of learning. So here we have reading literature grade 5 standard 3, and the standards design supports teachers in understanding that in grade 5, students must use the literacy concepts of character setting or events as evidence to support comprehension of literary text by comparing and contrasting them and analyzing their interaction across the text. Multidimensionality provides clarity to teachers to ensure that instruction is getting at the depth of the standard's intent. So the 2025 standards writers were tasked with setting forth a clear vision in the revision process. And here you may notice some significant additions from the science of reading research embedded right into the front matter of our standards document. I want to invite you to take a moment to read the 2025 vision statement. It's on page 1 of your note catcher. And as you read, think about maybe 3 important words or phrases that really resonate with your thinking around evidence-based literacy practices. And if you'll type those in the chat, we'll look for some themes and trends.
Hey, Tina, I'm seeing reciprocal, comprehension, empower students daily, daily practice, access, thrive, complex text, and vibrant learning experiences.
Yeah, I'm glad to see many of those words, reading comprehension being a product and a process. Thank you very much. Now we're going to expand on how research was foundation in some of those specific revisions for 2025. So the writers came with extensive experience in K-12 classrooms, from higher ed, from the community. They spent a great deal of time analyzing the research with some common misconceptions and public comment. So the writers knew, as we do, that the adage that K-3 is for learning to read and 4-12 is for reading to learn is simply not accurate. While the majority of decoding work is done within primary grades, we know that we're constantly learning to read and interpret more complex text as we progress through the grade levels. We know that K to 12 is for learning to read, and K to 12 is for learning to read. Additionally, some believe that the science of reading and or structured literacy really emphasizes phonics instruction alone. And we know that that is not true. The goal of all reading instruction at all grade levels is comprehension or making meaning from text. So we're going to go through just a little bit of the research that the writers had in front of them in these revisions and that we know from current research around the science of reading. And you can jot down maybe anything that's standing out to you at the bottom of page 1 of your note catcher as we look through some of the research and revisions. So beginning with the simple view of reading, we know that skilled reading is the product of word recognition and language comprehension. The model can be deconstructed and placed alongside Scarsborough's reading rope, which highlights in more detail the factors that contribute to skilled reading. And then we can see on this graph where the CAS for reading and writing connects to the two models, and you'll see that relationship between what we know to be true in research and our standards document. Here you'll see the simple view for writing, where we can see that skilled written expression is the product of foundational writing skills and composition. This model can also be deconstructed and placed alongside Joan Sedita's writing rope, which highlights in more detail the factors that contribute to skilled written expression. Then we can see where on the CAS for reading and writing, there's a connection between these two models. And again, you'll see that relationship between what we know to be true in the research and our CAS document. I want to point out that this document begins to demonstrate that reciprocal relationship between reading and writing, specifically within text structure and writing craft strands. And then finally, we can see where the CAS for reading and writing connects to the interactive dynamic literacy model from Dr. Young-Soon Kim. This model is hierarchical in that each skill below supports a skill above. So we know when one skill is lacking, the skills above are affected. This model also demonstrates how reading and writing is reciprocal and that bidirectional process supporting the evidence that we know reading and writing must be taught together rather than in isolated manners. Again, you'll see the relationship between what we know to be true and the Kentucky Academic Standards. So we've talked about some research and evidence being foundational for the standards writers as they made revisions to the 2025 document. Now we're going to look at two specific revisions, one in reading foundational standards and a broader reading comprehension standard for all K-12 learners. At the top of page 2 of the Standards at a Glance document, there are some key takeaways for revisions in the reading foundational skill standards. First, we know that decodable texts have a purpose of helping readers to understand, to learn to decode and read fluently outside of literature and informational text standards that relate to comprehension. We know that decodables provide learners with the opportunity to use their developing segmenting and blending skills to read words in order to develop automaticity. Decodable text encourage students to sound out words rather than guessing from pictures or predicting from other cues. And now that is clear in our standards document. There's also a shift in language from sight words to high frequency words. We know the majority of high frequency words are regular patterned based. They can be taught in tandem with corresponding phonics patterns. So there's not a need for traditional sight word list, as most can be learned within a scope and sequence for phonics instruction. Also the minority, so we know that only really a minority of high frequency words are irregular and can be practiced daily until the words are learned for both spelling and reading. Additionally, while reading with automaticity may seem like we're reading by sight, we know that reading is actually accomplished with a letter-by-letter processing. That in fact, fluent readers do perceive each and every letter of print. That's why we know the words on the screen are not casual and conservation, but causal and conversation, because our brains, while seemingly as if by sight, are reading letter by letter, even though we're reading with advancing sophistication and automaticity. And now that's clear in our standards document in our reading foundational skills as well. And then standard 10 is another standard that illustrates how evidence was used in revision. Here you'll see the 2019 version of the standard and the 2025 version. You'll notice some significant revisions with the addition of K-1 listening comprehension now being very explicit in the standard. And then you'll see some significant shifts in multidimensionality in standard 10 now, which stresses how students must not simply use comprehension strategies, but apply them with background knowledge to understand and analyze grade appropriate text independently. So a few notes about the standards revision. It's important that educators continue to regard evidence-based comprehension strategies as significant drivers of reading support. We know from IES guides for both K-3 and 4-12 that these specific comprehension strategies have positive effects across developmental stages. Teaching students to use strategies such as questioning the text, making mental models, paraphrasing, summarizing, or stopping and fixing something about comprehension when that is disrupted are all beneficial. However, research is clear that the goal of using the strategies is to make meaning from text. Researchers stress that too much focus on the process of learning the strategy can actually take away from students understanding the text. Instead, showing students how to use the strategies can help them make meaning from text. So rather than using this or viewing this standard as a reason to emphasize reading comprehension strategy instruction, strategies now are meant as tools that readers use to make meaning from text, and Standard 10 is now explicit that the role of these strategies is in service of comprehension. And then another significant revision in Standard 10 is the role of background knowledge. We know that research concludes reading comprehension is dependent on background knowledge. Readers use their background knowledge about words and the world around them to fill in gaps that authors leave out explicitly in the text. Researcher Daniel Willingham illustrates the relationship with the example of these two sentences. Trisha spilled her coffee. Dan jumped up to get a rag. You may immediately perceive a causal connection between those two sentences. Our mind is very good at bringing up the facts necessary to give context and connect the sentences, which give the writer that connection that's not explicitly connected for you. So including background knowledge in this standard not only supports the research, but positions our HQIRs as credible resources to guide instruction. So we can consider the 10 reading standards like parts of a ladder. Standard 1, read closely to analyze text, and Standard 10, read and analyze grade appropriate text independently, are the sides of the ladder. If one is not there, the ladder falls apart. We can think about standards 2 through 9 as ways to unpack a text and not meant to be isolated. So while some text may require us to use a few standards between 2 and 9, another text about the same topic may require us to call on other standards in order to comprehend. Readers use various rungs of the ladder depending on the demands of the text and the needs of the reader, while they're always using the two sides or standards 1 and 10. Different texts have different demands. Consequently, a variety of comprehension, strategy, skills, and standards are needed. And this is the idea of bundling. Bundling is the act of addressing numerous standards across various strands around a central topic. And we know in knowledge building HQIRs, standards are bundled into coherent learning progressions. This bundling of standards, skills, and strategies actually more closely replicates the actual act of reading, where skills are applied rather in integrated ways rather than isolated ones. Here are some images from some text sets in knowledge building HQIRs from elementary, middle, and high school levels. And the slide shows how grade appropriate complex text within these units of HQIRs do the following. They include quantitative and qualitative factors that affect complexity. They're set around a single topic. They may include video, media, other forms of multimedia that aligns with our interdisciplinary practice. One, anything that communicates a message is text. The text sets are, you'll notice, for K-1 beyond our youngest readers' decoding abilities, and that really supports the idea that in kindergarten and grade 1, text should be read aloud to support listening comprehension for our students, and that text sets vary and will require a bundling of standards, strategies, and skills in order to comprehend. You'll see Reading Standard 10 there for both K-1 and 2 to 12, also highlighted to show how grade appropriate complex text is required by Kentucky academic standards for reading and writing. Another important note is that our standards align and point to the use of HQIRs in Kentucky classrooms. So far, we've talked about some research that informed the revision. We've talked about some key revisions to Reading Foundational Skill Standards and Reading Standard 10, now including comprehension skills or comprehension strategies with background knowledge and the requirement of grade appropriate complex text. I want to invite you just to take a moment and think about something that may be standing out to you. Post it in the chat, just as a way for us to process our thinking. I'm going to hand it back over to Fox to share how we can support teacher planning in their process of using HQIRs effectively.
Thank you, Tina. So taking off from how the reading and writing standards and then Reading Standard 10, which we focused on in particular, are addressed within an HQIR, let's think together now about HQIRs more generally and the value they bring across content areas. So this sets up the need for intellectual preparation as a process for getting at that value and then making it available in the classroom to teachers and students. So as we work through the next 3 slides, I'll invite you to consider the question, what needs seem most pressing for educators entering public education in Kentucky? And as thoughts come up around that question through the next couple of slides, you could hold some of that thinking if it's helpful to on page 1 of your participant handout, and then we'll have a chance to process afterward. So the big question, why HQIRs? Today, we'll look at the resources themselves and what it is about them that makes them valuable for improving the quality of instruction. So first, let's think together about who develops an HQIR. Typically, it's a team of experts, and these are experts in the content area, learning science, differentiation, assessment, evidence-based instructional practices, etc. So these experts are working over an extended span of time and with considerable resources undertaking the work of designing an HQIR. So while some of this expertise certainly exists within a local district, the extent of that expertise and then the time and resources to fully deploy it, it's really hard to match. So thinking about the qualities that are engineered into an HQIR now, the first of those to call attention to is just ensuring standards align grade level text, tasks, and assessments, alleviating that anxiety that educators have as to whether or not they're working so hard to design or to find will actually provide students with what they need. So next, HQIRs provide coherent learning experiences within and across grade levels, making sure that what students experience horizontally across a course and vertically as they progress through the grade levels fits together in ways that both make sense to them and also support learning. Next, HQIRs embed evidence-based practices shown to best support student learning to provide effective scaffolding as students engage with that rigor of grade level content and tasks. Then HQIRs include supports for building content area knowledge and instructional craft, which allows teachers to not just use a resource well to be effective resource users, but to really grow in their pedagogy, skill, and craft. And then finally, HQIRs incorporate supports to respond to student learning needs, helping teachers diagnose and respond to learning needs across performance bands as learning unfolds. So fun fact, implementation is hard. HQIRs are comprehensively large, and the pedagogical shifts they entail are significant for educators. So appearing on the slide will be a quote from EdWeek, and I'll invite you just to notice what it calls to mind for you as you consider the most pressing needs of educators entering the field. So here is that quote. I'll give you a moment just to read and have some think time. Okay, so holding thinking from that slide, for our third slide, we're going to have a quote from a 2022 Rivet Education report. And again, as that quote appears, just notice what comes up for you regarding our question. Okay, so when you're ready, I invite you to share a thought or two you captured during the last few slides in the chat, or if you would prefer, feel free to unmute and share aloud. So again, thinking about those last three slides, what needs seem most pressing for educators entering public education in Kentucky? So what might we be thinking here? Anything any of that content might have sparked for you? Yes, just the time to manage all of the tools and resources given. And again, they are considerable, differing resource to resource, but it is a lot to make use of. And that already got a smiley face appended to it. Anything else that stood out? Ah, yeah. So changing focus from the skills-based instruction, so often observed in K-5, um, reading to purpose reading that can be integrated into disciplines such as science and social studies. Absolutely. And then, Rebecca, I'm glad in speaking to all of this, we definitely refer to the paradigm shift and just really trying to name for teachers as a part of change management all that has shifted from the previous paradigm to this paradigm of high quality instructional resources and curriculum based professional learning. It is a seismic shift, and it's really helpful to name that for teachers.
I'd love to speak up about this.
Please do.
I have been in my career in science education for elementary for 23 years. And it's really been hard for me because I have seen science and social studies pushed aside in the elementary grades as they're focusing on skill-based reading. So kids are reading books or stories. Some of them might be interesting to them, some are not, but they have no context. And I just saw some lessons last week, and I'm being told we're teaching by the standards, and I feel like it's a skill after skill after skill. And I don't see, I mean, in science, we know that students have to have experiences with something before we can even name a vocabulary term to have it make sense. But we're doing just the opposite in reading. So I'm looking at these standards. I'm very excited. I also know how long it has taken schools to even implement science, the new science standards, which are not new anymore, in schools. And I'm hoping that we can provide the teachers the support that they need and districts that districts support so that they could have teams that are working on the curricula they already have. For instance, we have Amplify Science in the schools near me, and they have so many books that they could use for reading and Amplify Science, but they don't. Many of they just don't. So these standards are so exciting. I would love to be able to see this merge the science and social studies to bring back just interesting content that students are learning and a purpose for learning, which also helps develop those skills.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It is a huge shift from doing skills in isolation almost for the sake of themselves to really having an authentic purpose for reading a text and then using the skills that really are necessary to unlock that particular text for that purpose and teaching the skills in a text dependent way is a huge shift that is really going to hopefully accelerate learning for students across content areas, but especially in reading and writing. Okay, and I saw lots of additional thinking coming through in the chat. I guess just as we cycle forward here for sake of time, we're going to look now at together at intellectual preparation and the intellectual preparation guidance and how it can support educators, leaders, and teachers in understanding how to use an HQIR effectively and then to support aligned growth in practice. So to introduce it now, the guide defines what is intellectual preparation. And as you can see in the screenshot here, it is a pretty short and sweet definition, just that first paragraph. And then from there, it's going to explain what is an intellectual preparation cycle with text that you can see here and a little bit onto the next page, and then illustrated by the figure in the screenshot that we're going to take a look at next. And then finally, it has a section for each of the 4 core processes of intellectual preparation. So they being unit internalization, lesson internalization, lesson rehearsal, and then student work analysis. So here we're going to take a look at the figure from the previous slide, putting the 4 processes of intellectual preparation sort of in motion for educators to help them visualize what the work looks like as it cycles through an instructional unit. Since intellectual preparation happens within that collaborative space of PLCs, and the analogy we often use is that PLCs are the vehicle that carries intellectual preparation forward to move towards strengthening instruction, it's worth taking a moment just to connect these processes to the 4 driving questions of a PLC. So these questions, and they source all the way back to the DeFores and that foundational work on PLCs, really frame what should be happening in that space. These encapsulate the instructional business of a PLC. And those questions are, what do we want students to learn? How will we know if they've learned it? How will we respond to students who have not learned it yet? And then how will we extend learning for those who have? So seeing these questions likely calls to mind increasing teacher clarity, which we know from research has a large effect on student learning. So as we return back to the figure now, you'll find as you explore this resource how these processes tightly correspond to addressing the 4 driving questions of a PLCs. And just before we transition, if we look sort of at the small print out from the asterisk at the bottom right of that, it just simply says that the 3 rounds of intellectual preparation that you see here in the figure are not an exact formula to be followed. How many rounds actually occur in a cycle really depends on mostly on the length and then the complexity of the unit. So 3 is just for the sake of the figure. It could be more, it could be fewer, again, just depending on the length and complexity of a unit and where a district is in implementation and just sort of the bandwidth they might have available at that time. So we're going to take a little bit of time now, about 4 minutes, to explore the intellectual preparation guidance. And we're going to bypass those first 2 sections to focus on the 4 core processes themselves, which you'll find on pages 2 through 3. So as you read, we'd like you to consider, how do the core processes taken together support strengthening teacher practice and improving the quality of instruction? So you can hold thinking on page 2 of your participant handout, and then afterward we'll have some time to discuss in breakout rooms. It's going to take just about 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes here for that reading and holding of thinking. Okay, coming back together now. In just a moment, we'll transition into breakout rooms for about 4 or 5 minutes to discuss thoughts you captured around, again, how do the core processes of intellectual preparation taken together, all 4 of them, support strengthening teacher practice and improving the quality of instruction. So as those breakout rooms open, just let us know if you encounter any issues entering a breakout room, and then we'll see you on the other side in about 5 minutes. We have everybody back, so welcome back. I hope those conversations were terrific. As you're ready, let's hear some of what stood out to you from those breakout room conversations. So again, feel free to share something you contributed to the conversation, maybe something a colleague shared, or even if you're having a thought just coming back together, whole group now. So again, you can just post in the chat or unmute if you prefer and share aloud. Just anything that might have stood out from those conversations. What are you all thinking? Yeah, the importance of background knowledge, absolutely. Again, that's critical to comprehension across content areas, but also those domains of background knowledge being vitally important to what happens in the reading and writing classroom as well. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate calling out the vibrant learning piece, and that the processes build upon one another to both, we talk about two things as you saw in the visual earlier. We're trying to improve students' academic outcomes, but then also the quality of the student experience and these processes coming together to make learning, that experience of learning, more vibrant for kids. Yes, giving them time. So going through those processes and giving them time, and giving educators time to grow, including leaders to really grow into use of those processes. Yes, over that time has the potential to improve classroom instruction. And this can be really engaging, heady, satisfying work. So that's where that intellectual part of intellectual preparation comes in for educators as well. Okay, so I'm going to thank you all for your input in the chat, and I'm going to pass it forward to Misty now.
And so what we're going to do now is we're going to drill down into intellectual preparation, specifically looking at the process of internalization. And so coming back to the visual, we would see that for each unit of instruction, teachers would first start with unit internalization prior to teaching the unit, and then they engage in lesson internalization for the key lessons within the unit that they've identified within their PLC that would be really important for them to process together. So internalization in general, it represents a shift in how teachers prepare for a unit. So instead of spending time designing their own units, internalization is going to help them to make sense of the structure and the intended learning of a given unit within an HQIR, as well as those evidence-based practices that are embedded to support student learning. So I'm going to hand it back over to Tina, who's just going to show one example of a critical evidence-based practice that's built into the reading and writing HQIRs that's called for by our standards.
When teachers intellectually prepare for a unit, they leverage the bundling of reading and writing standards to support a text-centered instructional model in HQIRs. So research is clear that reading supports writing and writing supports reading, and we know that those are reciprocal processes. We also know in Kentucky, students are expected to use 3 types of writing in the classroom. Writing to learn are those quick, informal opportunities where students process their thinking in things such as journal writing. Writing to demonstrate learning are tasks that students do to give formative data to their teachers about how they're progressing towards mastery, and for teachers to give them feedback on that. And then writing for publication are tasks that engage students in vibrant learning, where they synthesize their learning and communicate to a real-world audience. This grade 6 example demonstrates the embedded tasks around these 3 types of writing in a unit on communicable diseases. And it shows how Kentucky academic standards for reading and writing are bundled to support that reciprocal process of reading and writing while placing rich, complex text at the center of instruction. So these authentic writing opportunities strategically support readers and writers and provide coherence for learners. And unit internalization is vital for teachers and teams to plan to leverage embedded literacy opportunities to improve student learning experiences. Our teachers need support in making this shift from lesson planning to lesson delivery using an HQIR. So Misty's going to help us dig into how unit internalization process supports both teachers and students.
So the process of unit internalization, it really just provides a structure for teachers within a PLC to develop an understanding of how the standards, task, and assessments support the overall arc of learning within each unit of an HQIR. So you're going to see in just a moment that the protocol is divided into 3 sections. So the first section is referred to as the understand section, and this supports teachers in understanding the unit structure, and this is where they're going to take the assessment to see what students need to know and be able to do by the end of the unit. So again, starting with that end in mind. Then there's the take stock section, and this is going to guide teachers through analyzing relevant data to determine student readiness for the upcoming learning within that unit. And then finally, there's the take action section, and this focuses on supporting the teachers in making potential adjustments to the unit based on multiple factors like just student readiness for that learning, as well as local instructional priorities and initiatives. So right now, what we want to do is give you all a chance to review the reading and writing version of the unit internalization protocol, since we've been talking about reading and writing this morning. And there should be a link to it in the chat. And then as you read it or review it, we just want you to consider two things here. How could this protocol, as you envision teachers engaging in this in a PLC, how could it support deepening their understanding of the HQIR, as well as providing standards-aligned, high-quality instruction to all students? So we're going to give you all about 5 minutes to individually review. It won't be time for a close read, but to kind of skim through it. There is space on page 2 of your handout if that's helpful for you to hold your thinking. But again, skim and keep these 2 questions in mind. And then let's come back together. So really quick, I want to just come back to the example that Tina highlighted just a few minutes ago around the integration of reading and writing and how that's embedded in the design of many of those HQIRs. Hopefully something you noted around the internalization protocol as you reviewed it is in the understand section. There's a specific question that's prompting teachers to think about the reading that students are going to be doing in that unit and how that reading is going to inform their writing. And again, this is just one reason why internalization is critical to helping teachers more deeply understand the HQIR and then how to effectively implement into classroom instruction. And so I do want us to take a moment here for just some whole group share out around that protocol. So I know it wasn't time to kind of closely examine it, but just based on what you did see, what did you all note in terms of how unit internalization can support teachers in deepening their understanding of the HQIR, as well as providing that high quality standards aligned instruction to all students? So like before, please feel free to unmute and share. You can kind of post what's standing out to you in the chat. But again, it could be around either or both questions, but would just love to hear your kind of initial reactions based on what you saw in that protocol. And I see someone had put in the chat, like really helping. Sometimes the students aren't connecting their assessments with the learning going on in the unit and how this could intentionally help them kind of slow down and really consider that. Yeah, having the teachers actually take the assessments themselves to really see the kind of thinking that students are going to have to do. Yeah, and I appreciate that it's a more informed and intentional process for just blanketly handing teachers an HQIR and kind of saying, go forth and do. Anything else? Before I move on, I saw in the chat where someone had said, well, what about singletons that we know that we have in some of our smaller districts? And I think Crystal put some examples of what we would share as recommendations there, but I did just want to say we are actively kind of gathering examples and bright spots of how districts are tackling those very kinds of challenges. So I'll give you just an example we're seeing from science in one of our smaller districts where they have a single science teacher for 6th, 7th, and 8th. So when they come together in a vertical PLC, one time they might look at a 6th grade unit that they're going to internalize together. They're supporting that teacher in internalizing because the process is replicable to any of the grade levels. And what's really important there too is that within the HQIR that they're all using, it's going to use the same instructional approach, the same instructional routine. So they're all benefiting from seeing. And so like one time they might do 6th grade. The next time they come together, they're all supporting the 7th grade teacher in that process. So we're trying to find different ways that districts are supporting that. Anything else before I move on here? Okay, so as we start to wrap up this section, we do just want to share some recommendations around unit internalization, again, just kind of based on work with districts and what we're seeing. So the first is, as you saw, there's a whole lot happening in that unit internalization protocol. So the recommendation is to strategically narrow the focus. So for example, we would recommend when you're really just getting to know the HQIR, you're kind of in the early stages of implementation, simply live in that that understand section so that you're deepening your understanding of the HQIR, its instructional approach, and those design elements. The second thing that we're really emphasizing is that this process, it is about the rich conversations and the sense making that teachers would do in their PLCs together. And it should not be about compliance to simply filling out a note catcher or some lesson planning form. It's about the collaborative conversations and sense making. Then in terms of cautions, so we do want to offer some here because I think this is really important for even our pre-service teachers to kind of keep in mind and already think about is one, we've heard how some people want to skip straight to lesson internalization. And I get it. It in their mind seems most applicable to what they're going to be doing tomorrow or even the next 2 days in their classroom. However, when we don't take the time to engage in unit internalization, it can lead to some pretty significant issues. One, when teachers don't understand what's happening at the unit level, then they're not going to understand that specific lesson and how it contributes to the unit's arc of learning and the intended outcomes. And then another issue is that teachers then tend to want to make some adjustments. So the first kind of adjustment we see is they tend to want to over supplement with other things because they think the lesson doesn't address all the aspects of a particular standard to its full depth, not realizing that upcoming lessons are going to get the students there. It's very intentional in its design. Another kind of problem we see here is that teachers may tend to skip critical portions of a lesson, not realizing how that is essential to some upcoming lessons or even to the actual learning outcomes of the unit. And so like you saw in the intellectual preparation guide, today we just looked at the reading and writing version of unit internalization, but we have one available for math and science as well. And so the last thing I'll just share quickly is that in terms of HQIRs, KDE has now published an approved list for both reading and writing and mathematics for elementary, middle school, and high school. You can see those listed on the right-hand side of this slide, and I think we actually put them in the chat for you as well. But if you look at the table, so what we did in the table is we linked in HQIRs from our state list that are open education resources that are available for free. So these resources could be great options to utilize with pre-service teachers for them to engage in the processes of intellectual preparation, starting with that unit internalization. And even if they may not know what HQIR is going to be used in a school that they eventually work in the future, the time spent engaging in this process is going to support them in transferring that to any HQIR that they might encounter.
So as we wrap up our portion of today's sessions, we want to re-emphasize the key features of the revised Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing, as well as intellectual preparation and the value of that for teacher planning. We know that the revisions are aligned with the science of reading and they point toward structured literacy practices. We talked about the emphasis on the importance of bundling standards, placing complex text at the center of instruction and giving students access to grade level content and knowledge. We talked about how the standards now require students to engage in reading and writing and text-based writing as reciprocal processes rather than isolated skills, and that they point towards using HQIRs, focusing on unit and lesson internalization and delivery in place of lesson design in reading and writing, math, and science. So with that, we're going to have the opportunity to go back to your great breakout rooms to discuss this question. How might these considerations influence your current syllabi in instruction with undergraduate and or graduate students? We're going to have about 4 minutes to discuss and then come back and share as a whole group. Okay, welcome back. We would love to hear from anyone about how these considerations might influence your current work. Wondering if you would be willing to share what you discussed or something standing out to you.
I'll go. In my group, I didn't get a chance to really build upon this because we kind of switched, but we kind of discussed how our students are responding to the change. our students can definitely feel the rigor in having to teach with science-based instruction. But I have a kindergartner myself, so just seeing it like implemented from the parent and from the educator perspective, I can see how valuable it is. And we just basically discussed that it's hard. It is really hard, but it's effective. So we discussed, it was mentioned, daily changes to the syllabi just to make sure that you're diving deep into providing our educators with the right amount of training, because they can only present it to our students if they have the right training. So it's just hard, but I can already see it, paying off.
Thank you so much. It's very exciting work, and we're excited to see the results as in the coming years at the student level, growing our readers and writers.
And I saw someone put in the chat, and I do want to say on that previous slide, we do have one open education resource for science. So we've got science on there for you. Right now, there's only one that's available for free. But we hear you about social studies, like we're right there with you.
Yeah, I see that question about getting the list of open source resources on maybe a Google Sheet as well. So we can make a note of that. Anyone else like to share? Thank you so much for your engagement today. We hope that you received some resources that will support your work. So now I have the privilege of transitioning us to Christy Biggerstaff, where she'll give us some Read to Succeed updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Good morning, everyone. I am Christy Biggerstaff, the Director of Early Literacy, here to give you some quick updates around Kentucky Reads to Succeed. You'll go to the next slide. On this chart, you can kind of see under the umbrella of Kentucky Reads to Succeed, on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see our professional learning initiatives that are still going on with the Letters Professional Learning, the Kentucky Early Literacy Leadership Network, and then our annual conference that we are gearing up for, our third conference. If you want to write this down for your calendars, next June 8th and 9th at the Galt House in Louisville, Kentucky. On the right-hand side of your screen is the coaching model that's going on year 2 with our coaches in schools, and then our resources. Let me give you just some quick updates also about our coaching model. We started with our coaches in schools last year with 33 partnership schools going into year 2. We have 13 new partnership schools starting this year. And the school-based literacy coaches are in one specific school working intensively with educators and administrators on their HQIR implementation. They're also doing exactly what we've been talking about today and really focusing on lesson and unit internalization and then teaching practices. Those partnerships are going very well, and we're excited to see some of the growth that are happening in our schools. We also want to build out our literacy coaching model to more coaches in the near future. And just to kind of give you some information about that coaching model, our new coaches that have been inside partnership schools 1 year, now that we're getting to see some of that data, we're seeing some positive trending data around the impact that they're having in their schools. So as you can see on this slide, HQIR implementation integrity within the partnership schools increased over the course of the year, with 60% of the lessons observed were demonstrating upper bucket integrity by the end of that school year. And on this slide, the chart, you can see throughout the course of around 7 months, the percentage of lessons that utilize grade level appropriate text increased from 57% when they were first in the classroom to 85% as teachers implemented their HQIR with more integrity along with the coaches' help. Letters is still going strong. We kicked off cohort 4 in September of this year. We are thrilled to have over 7,000 educators and administrators to have committed to this important learning about the science of reading. It really starts with the professional learning. I'm also equally thrilled to tell you that we will be offering a cohort 5 and a cohort 6 for sure in the future. And speaking of letters, I wanted to kind of give you some information about our ICF, who is our third-party evaluator for our letters implementation and our coaching model, just concluded a 2-year study. It involved a critical analysis of both initiatives to ensure their success. Through focus groups and surveys, educators noted that due to their participation in letters, they had an increased confidence and comfort in implementing evidence-based instructional strategies, more intentionality, and were able to offer better support for their students. We had 2 very exciting statistically significant findings, say that 3 times fast. The ICF research also revealed the effects of sustained exposure to letters-trained teachers on student reading outcomes. 5th grade students who were taught by letters-trained teachers for 2 consecutive years demonstrated higher reading scores than their peers who experienced only 1 year or no exposure to letters-trained teachers. So we know that professional learning is making an impact in our student experience. And then also special education students in both 4th and 5th grade who were taught for 2 years by a letters-trained teachers significantly outperformed their counterparts with fewer years of exposure. So these findings provide early evidence that cumulative access to letters-trained teachers contributes to stronger literacy outcomes, particularly for students with greater instructional needs and in those higher grade levels. I wanted to also point out that we have multiple early literacy resources on the early literacy webpage at KDE. I've linked some of them here, but I implore you to please explore that early literacy. There's a lot of information about structured literacy, which we have mentioned today. We also link out to the resources that were also talked about today. So please explore those early literacy resources. And then too, if you have any questions, you can put them here in the chat and I will try to respond to those here, or you can reach out to my email at any time. I would love to help support you in any way possible. And I think now we're going to turn it over to Crystal, who's going to give us some Kentucky Numeracy Count updates.
Thank you, Christy. So Kentucky Numeracy Counts Act, or House Bill 162, was passed by the General Assembly in 2024 and aims to strengthen math education by requiring evidence-based instruction and early interventions to ensure all students achieve proficiency. So we're going to share some important requirements of the law and parts of the timeline that will be important for new and early career teachers to consider. By January 1, 2026, per KRS 158.8402 and the Kentucky Numeracy Counts Act, each superintendent must select KDE-approved universal screeners and diagnostic assessments for K-3 mathematics. All K-3 teachers must be trained on the selected assessments prior to their use in the 26-27 school year. The updated KDE-approved list of valid and reliable screeners and diagnostics is now available to support district selection and planning, and that was just updated this month. Beginning in the 26-27 school year, all K-3 students must be administered a KDE-approved universal math screener within the first 30 calendar days. Students identified as at risk must receive a diagnostic assessment within 45 calendar days to pinpoint specific numeracy and math content needs. For students needing accelerated support, a mathematics improvement plan must be developed and implemented by a school-based team within the first 60 calendar days. To support districts in creating effective mathematics improvement plans, KDE has developed a customizable template aligned to House Bill 162 requirements. This tool can be used to document intervention strategies, progress monitoring, and parent communications, and may be adapted to fit existing MTSS processes. The provided Math Improvement Plan template is a meaningful tool, not just a compliance mechanism, used during the problem-solving process to document interventions, track progress, and inform caregivers in supporting student learning, both in and out of the classroom. Familiarity with this process will help new and early career teachers leverage a structured approach to student acceleration and progress monitoring. The Kentucky Numeracy Counts Act provides districts with comprehensive implementation timeline, linking to resources from the KDE webpage. Key resources include professional learning opportunities through Numeracy Counts academies, lists of valid, reliable screening and diagnostic math assessments, and KDE-approved high-quality instructional resources. There are also mini grants to support HQIR adoption. 20 districts have been awarded $70,000 each through the mini grants. Additional details can be found on the KDE website. If you have any questions regarding Kentucky Numeracy Counts Act, please reach out to Chelsea Tingle. She is our Director of Math Education, and her contact information is here on the screen. As we close out our time together today, I want to remind you that kystandards.org webpage is home to all the Kentucky Academic Standards documents, as well as resources designed for their implementation. There are content-specific resources that will help educators understand the instructional shifts in the CAS for each content area. And there are also general resources for both school and district leaders and teachers for selecting high-quality instructional resources, developing the local curriculum, and supporting effective implementation. The webpage is updated regularly with new and revised resources. So if you haven't been there for a while, we encourage you to visit and explore. The best way to stay in the know regarding events, resources, and announcements from the Division of Program Standards is our KY Standards newsletter. You can subscribe to the newsletter and several other publications from the Office of Teaching and Learning by following the link on this slide or scanning the QR code. We'd like to take a moment for you to complete a brief survey. And so we'll drop that link in the chat. There's also a QR code here on the screen. But before we pause for that, I want to thank you for your time today. I know that it's a very busy time of the school year, and I appreciate you all prioritizing being on the call today to share in this information with us and sharing this learning. If you have any questions regarding today's content, please reach out to the point of contact on the screen. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.